that over 164 million of Americans play video games. With video games evolving from the traditional arcade machine to the Xbox and PlayStation and so on, video games have become a common form of entertainment today. Throughout my speech, I will discuss the vast scope of video games, the positives and negatives, through statistical research and information found from credible sources. Video games have grown throughout the years. As you can see, video games today have become the global market in $156 million, and it is projected to grow even further from Statista, a database that is known for calculating these kinds of forecasts. This is only the global market. A little closer to home, the national market, which is in the U.S., is currently $65 billion. And as you can see, it reached a record all-time high of $66 billion. Now, through common sense, you probably know that this is because of the coronavirus, and it was. As Brenda Vierholt, a clinical psychologist, found that between March 16th to March 22nd, video game sales increased by a whopping 63%. And through Statista, they claim that the only reason why it only lowered so much is because people found a liking for video games and they kept playing them. Because as you can see, 55 billion and 66 billion is a pretty big number. While over half of the population plays video games, you may be wondering, what kinds of effects do they have on individuals? Well, there are many benefits people can reap when playing video games. Daphne Bavelier and Sean Green from Scientific American claim that video games improve cognition. They found that people who play video games have a heightened sensitivity to visual contrast versus people who don't. If you don't know what visual contrast is, it's basically your ability to see in places where you can't really see that well, such as when you're driving in the morning in fog or even when you're in the dark. They also found that they also tested for attention and reaction times with popular games such as Call of Duty. And if you don't know what Call of Duty is, it's a pretty violent video game, first shooter, and basically kill the other enemy or zombies. And they found that people who play video games have faster reaction times and are more accurate through the tests such as the attentional blink test. And what the attentional blink test is basically a bunch of images show, and when they tell you to focus on one image, you tend to fail to see the next image. And here's an example. So basically there's going to be a bunch of letters that show, and after the W, you have to find what letter comes right after it. And the answer to this was F. As you can see, video games have a big influence on cognition, but they also have an influence on emotions. An analysis from the American Psychological Association found that several studies have shown a causal relation between video games and improved mood and increases in positive emotion. The reason for this is because video games immerse people in an intrinsically rewarding activity, while at the same time giving a loss of self-consciousness. And this is basically is a means of escape from the real world, as you are being focused, but at the same time you're not thinking about work, school, and such. And this is only something that a few of you described in my survey. And through this results into a higher self-esteem, less anxiety and stress, and is a safer way for instant gratification for young people. Another common positive to video games is socialization. Scientific American, a scientific magazine, states, contrary to stereotypes, the average gamer is not a socially isolated, inept nerd who spends most of his or her time loafing on the couch. Over 70% of gamers play a game with a friend, either cooperatively or competitively. Brenda Vierholt, who I mentioned before, has a doctorate in clinical psychology, and she found in a survey that over 80% of teens feel more connected playing video games rather than just talking on the phone or texting during the pandemic, which was big because most of us didn't really have someone to talk to, or most of us didn't have people to talk to, but usually when we talk to people, we're usually doing something like going to a restaurant or going on a car ride. Video games were a way to help facilitate socialization. She also found that video games give children and adolescents a chance to learn by doing. Because most children, sometimes they're afraid to express themselves, but video games, they give help to do that. While video games bring many advantages, like most things, they have their disadvantages. There are actually many ways video games can harm an individual physically. Peter Grinspoon from Harvard Medical School describes, overuse injuries are injuries that come from activities that involve rapid, repeated use of muscles and tendons when they are continued to be used. They cause numbness, weakness, and possibly permanent injury. Overuse injuries are rampant among gamers. Now, because the thumbs are Because the thumbs and the wrists are constantly used, they are susceptible to being injured in video games. One injury that he finds is carpal tunnel. Carpal tunnel is when a nerve in your wrist becomes inflamed and it becomes hard to use, which is also common when you're doing things like typing a lot or playing like stuff like tennis and everything. Another injury he found was called Corvain's tendinosynovitis, and that is when tendons in your thumbs become inflamed, and if you keep using them, eventually it'll get to the point where it just becomes stuck and you can't use it. And the only way to heal it is through surgery. Another common injury you can get, well, not necessarily an injury, but a bother, is eye strain. Now, most of us probably have most eye strain through phones and such, but with video games, it is very common because you're constantly focused on a screen. Although the author also finds a solution for this called the 20-20 rule. Basically what it is for every 20 minutes you look at a screen, you look at an object 20 feet away for 20 seconds. Additionally, video games can also cause addiction. Meredith Gansner, an instructor in psychiatry, found from the World Health Organization that it is diagnosed when sufficient severity to result in significant impairment in personal, family, educational, occupational, or other areas of functioning and has been evident for 12 months. So basically, if you play video games and you feel like you're addicted, it is probably a problem if you're not doing things such as doing your homework, going out and such. While video game addiction is controversial, Gassner backs this up by stating, individuals meeting criteria for internet gaming disorder appear to exhibit loss sensitivity, enhanced reactivity to certain cues, and aberrant reward-based learning. And these symptoms are very common with gambling addiction. And she goes on to say that sometimes video games can trigger dopamine, and dopamine is a addictive chemical that is sometimes triggered by cigarettes, which is why sometimes it can be very addicting. So regardless, with the positives and negatives, video games are very impactful to an individual. Throughout my speech, I have informed you on how much money people have invested in video games, the positives in cognition, emotion, and social effects, and some of the drawbacks such as addiction and injuries. Hopefully now you know some of the effects through this speech and for whether or not you yourself should play or should not play. Thank you all for listening to my speech.